One of the most popular machines from Prime is the arm curl, and pretty much all variations, the plate loaded and the select rise. Because when we look at a bicep curl, especially like a preacher curl variation, what you're gonna see is that essentially almost all those exercises are hard somewhere in the middle. So if I'm doing a standing bicep curl, the weight is heaviest here. If I'm doing an incline bicep curl, the weight is heaviest here. If I'm doing a preacher curl, it's heavy. They're all heaviest kind of in the middle, give or take a few degrees. So from a resistance profile, the majority of those free weight exercises are redundant. And even when we get into cables, like in order to really tax the extreme ranges, we have to do like some pretty weird like setups, like in terms of our positioning of the body versus the cable. Not that it can't be done, but this just simplifies that a ton in terms of changing the resistance profile. The other thing is that when we look at a preacher curl, so if Chelsea just does this with one arm here, when we get into this lengthened position, the biceps have the worst mechanics. All of the elbow flexors essentially have very poor mechanics in terms of being able to do this weight. So what it does is it makes it a lot more strenuous in that fully stretched position. So when people are doing free weights, outside of deadlifts, I would say the most common place that people pop a bicep is coming down into this fully extended position and a preacher curl, because there's now not a lot of give in the shoulder, and so now it's really easy to damage this tissue. So not saying that you shouldn't do preacher curls, but it's definitely an exercise where if you're taking it to the fully lengthened position with heavy load, you should use caution, you should use controlled tempo. Actually, a thing I often do, either when training closer to fatigue or with heavier loads, is I will actually have people start shortening the range of motion and not go all the way there. They tend to be able to not only perform and handle load better, but they don't have elbow pain, they don't have a lot of instability down there, and ultimately feel a lot safer, okay? With this, because I have the ability to essentially eliminate or at least reduce the load there, what I could do is I could make it 100% opposite by switching over to the 2, which is now as she pulls this up, it's gonna make it most challenging here, okay? And then as she starts to go down, it's getting essentially lighter, and now as we're in the dangerous spot, dangerous is probably a little excessive word. It depends on your performance of it, right? So in the right person's hands, could be relatively safe, but in a lot of people with torn biceps, dangerous is perfectly accurate. But here, what this has done is it's essentially eliminated that, or at least drastically reduced that, okay? The other thing is, if she pulls up, okay, overloading this position, in order for her to do this, she would essentially have to be in a cable machine that was pulling up like this. Which if you can imagine that means like she needs to be like on the floor doing high cables, like pulling down and then having to pull this down at the same time. It's a complicated exercise, right? Not that it can't be done, but this sure simplifies it a heck of a lot, okay? If you go ahead and set that down, you can still accomplish the same profile as a dumbbell or a free weight, okay? And if I move it to 1, now as she goes in and pulls through this, it's gonna be heavy in the middle, okay? So if she comes bend down a little bit, when we get to, it's gonna be about right there. And you can actually, if you pay attention to these cams, you can see how they work. It's kind of cool. So this is gonna challenge there, which is still slightly different than a dumbbell, which is gonna be hardest here. If I wanted to mimic a dumbbell perfectly, go ahead and set her down. What I would do is I would set it on the 5 setting, which is going to be 1 further away from the fully lengthened. So it's not heaviest down here, but it's gonna be heaviest right here. So this mimics what a barbell or a dumbbell would do, right? So it's going to drop off at the top, right? And it's gonna get heavier here. Now, if I wanted that same profile, but I wanted safety, I could apply the same technique as I do with the dumbbell and simply just stop the range of motion there. So this allows us to use the mechanics of the machine to avoid that position, but if I want to still have something that drops off in the short position, which is definitely gonna be a good idea, because eventually you're gonna get so weak that you can't get all the way to the short position with a heavy load. You're gonna need to switch and transition to loading that mid-range position. You can still use the strategy of reducing that range of motion.